When I bought that quiet piece of land on the edge of Maplewood Estates, I thought I had finally found peace. After 20 years in law enforcement, all I wanted was open space, trees, and a little distance from people who loved drama. The property had once been part of the original farmland before the neighborhood developed around it, and though the HOA managed the surrounding streets, my 2-acre lot was legally exempt, an independent parcel with its own deed and boundary survey recorded with the county. The first few weeks were bliss. I spent mornings sipping coffee on the porch and afternoons clearing dead brush from the woods. Then one Saturday, while trimming a fallen oak, I noticed tire tracks cutting through the side of my property. When I followed them, I found a group of teenagers using my backlot as a shortcut to the community lake. It didn't take long to realize that some HOA residents had been treating my land like their own backyard for years, picnicking, walking dogs, even setting up small bonfires. I wasn't angry at the kids. They didn't know better, but it irritated me that adults in the neighborhood had encouraged it. So I decided to post a simple, unmissable message: private property, no trespassing. I ordered a sturdy metal sign, mounted it near the tree line facing the main HOA walking path, and thought that would be the end of it. But apparently my sign was the spark that lit a wildfire. The next day I woke to the sound of loud voices outside. When I stepped onto my porch, 3 HOA board members, led by a woman named Karen Wilcox, were standing near the sign, gesturing like I had just put up a nuclear warning. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, the type of person who believed her clipboard granted her divine authority over anyone within sight. I walked over calmly and introduced myself, hoping for a civil conversation. "Good morning," I said. "Is there a problem?" Karen turned, clutching her folder. "Yes," she said, squinting at me as if I'd committed a felony. "This is community property, and you can't just post signs here. You're violating HOA regulations." I blinked, half amused, half annoyed. "Actually, this is my property," I replied, pointing at the stakes marking my boundary line. "It's not part of your HOA land. The county records show that clearly." She laughed like I had told a bad joke. "Oh, no, no, no," she said in her best condescending tone. "All of this is part of Maplewood Estates. We maintain it, we mow it, and it's open for residents. You can't just claim it's private." Her 2 friends nodded in agreement, whispering something about troublemakers. I pulled out my phone, opened a photo of the deed, and scrolled to the property map. "This is parcel 146B, I said, showing her. "It's been privately owned for decades." "Your HOA map is wrong." Karen frowned, snatched out her own papers, and jabbed at them with a manicured finger. "Our covenants clearly state that all open areas around the walking path are under HOA management. You can't restrict access." Her voice grew shrill, the kind that attracts an audience, and within minutes 6 neighbors had gathered, watching like it was a reality show. I sighed, realizing this was going nowhere. "Look," I said, "I'm not here to argue. This is private property, and I've got no problem with neighbors walking around it, but no one should be crossing through without permission." "That's all?" Karen's face turned crimson. "You're being hostile," she barked. "We'll take this up with the HOA board. You can't just put up a sign and threaten people." I went back inside, hoping she'd calm down. But within an hour, a white SUV with Maplewood HOA enforcement printed on the side rolled up, and a man in a polo shirt stepped out with a clipboard. He approached like he was serving a warrant. "Sir," he said sternly, "we received complaints that you're obstructing common property." I couldn't believe it. They actually had an enforcement officer. I explained again that the land wasn't theirs, that the title was in my name, and that I could show him county GIS records, but he barely listened. "You'll need to remove the sign immediately while the board reviews the situation," he said, pretending to sound official. "Failure to comply may result in fines." I almost laughed. "Fines? You can't fine someone who's not in your HOA," I said flatly. He frowned, scribbled something on his clipboard, and left muttering that this would get escalated. That evening, I got my first taste of Maplewood's gossip machine. My phone buzzed with messages from a few curious neighbors who'd found my contact info from the county website. Some were polite, others not so much. One message read, "You're ruining the neighborhood vibe. Take your sign down." Another said, "Karen says you're trying to steal community land. What's wrong with you?" I ignored them and poured myself a glass of bourbon, thinking this nonsense would fade in a few days. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. By Monday morning, things escalated beyond absurdity. I was out back repairing a fence post when I noticed flashing blue lights near my driveway. My stomach dropped, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I recognized the pattern. The HOA had called the police. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually near their holsters. The older one approached. "Afternoon, sir," he said. "We got a report of a trespasser on Maplewood Estates property. Are you the owner here?" I almost burst out laughing at the irony. "Yes, officer." "I'm the property owner. Someone from the HOA must have called." The younger cop looked confused. "Wait, they said a guy put up a sign and is refusing to leave community land." I shook my head, grabbed the deed from my truck, and handed it over. "This is my land," I said calmly. "Recorded at the county office. You can call them if you want." The older officer examined the paperwork, then nodded. "Yeah, that checks out." He turned toward the road where Karen stood at a distance with her arms crossed, glaring. He waved her over. "Ma'am, this is private property. The records are clear." Karen's face twisted like she'd just bitten a lemon. "That's impossible." "He's lying. We've always used this area. It's ours." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, unless you've got a court order saying otherwise, you need to leave him alone." She sputtered something about community rights and illegal signage, but the officer cut her off. "Ma'am, if you keep harassing the property owner, you could be cited." That shut her up, at least for the moment. As the officers drove off, I looked at Karen still standing there, visibly shaking with anger. She pointed a finger at me and shouted, "This isn't over! You'll regret this!" Then she stormed off, clipboard clutched like a sword. I exhaled, knowing deep down that this was only the beginning. Because when an HOA feels challenged, especially by someone they can't control, they don't back down. They dig in, twist rules, spread lies, and weaponize bureaucracy. I didn't realize it yet, but the battle for my property had only just begun. The next few days after the police visit were strangely quiet, but I knew that calm was only the silence before the storm. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. She was the type who turned personal humiliation into a crusade. By Tuesday morning, I started noticing subtle signs of the HOA's retaliation. Flyers began appearing on every mailbox in Maplewood Estates, printed with bold letters. "Community land under dispute. Trespasser claims ownership." The document accused an unauthorized individual of erecting signage and obstructing HOA access. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew it was about me. My phone started buzzing again, this time with less curiosity and more hostility. Some neighbors called me a squatter. Others said I was ruining the neighborhood. It would have been laughable if it weren't so irritating. They didn't know that the so-called community land had been legally mine for months, purchased fair and square with full documentation. But in HOA territory, truth didn't matter. Perception did. 2 days later, I got a knock at my door. Standing there was a man in a navy suit holding a clipboard and wearing an HOA badge. "Good morning," he said stiffly. "I'm Todd Raymond, HOA compliance officer. I'm here to conduct a boundary inspection." I stared at him blankly. "A boundary inspection?" I repeated. "You mean trespassing?" He didn't even flinch. "We've had several complaints," he continued, "and the board authorized an inspection to verify property limits. You're required to cooperate." I crossed my arms. "Required? By who?" He adjusted his tie nervously. "By the HOA." I smiled coldly. "Todd, I'm not part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. You step 1 foot on my property and you'll be the one trespassing." His face paled, but he muttered something about consulting legal counsel and walked off, pretending to take photos from the sidewalk. By that afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called the county surveyor's office and requested an official boundary inspection, not because I doubted my ownership, but because I wanted a government record to bury their nonsense once and for all. The surveyor, a polite man named Dennis, came out 2 days later with his crew. They used GPS mapping equipment, remeasured the property lines, and confirmed what I already knew. My fence and sign were exactly where they should be. Dennis even chuckled. "You wouldn't believe how often we get calls like this," he said. "These HOA folks sometimes forget their power stops at their own borders." He handed me a stamped copy of the survey map, signed and dated. "This," he said, "is proof that the land's yours, no question. but Karen didn't see it that way. The following weekend, while I was in town buying lumber, I came back to find my private property sign gone. In its place stood a shiny new sign that read, Maplewood Estates Nature Access Trail, residents only. It was bolted into the ground where mine used to be. My jaw dropped. That wasn't vandalism. That was organized defiance. I immediately checked my security camera footage and, sure enough, there she was. Karen herself with 2 board members, prying my sign out and installing theirs. They even posed for a picture afterward, like they had just conquered enemy territory. I felt anger rise in my chest, but I wasn't about to handle it emotionally. No, I decided I'd handle it legally. I downloaded the footage, printed photos, and filed a police report for property tampering and trespassing. The officer on duty, the same one who had come before, shook his head in disbelief. "They really don't know when to quit, huh?" he said. "Don't worry, we'll document this. You're fully within your rights." He gave me a copy of the report, which I stored carefully in a folder along with my survey map, deed, and correspondence. I wasn't building a defense anymore, I was building a case. Because the HOA had crossed from harassment into a criminal act, and I had every intention of making them pay for it. Within a week, Karen doubled down. I received a certified letter from the HOA titled Notice of Violation and Intent to Fine. It accused me of defacing HOA property, installing unauthorized signage, and obstructing community access. The letter demanded I cease occupation of the disputed parcel and remove all unauthorized barriers within 10 days or face daily fines of $500. Laughed out loud when I read it. It was like watching a bad sitcom where the villain keeps digging her own grave. Still, I decided to respond. Not with anger, but with precision. I drafted a formal letter, attached copies of my deed, survey, and the police report, and sent it directly to their lawyer, not the HOA. My closing line read, "Any further interference with my lawful property rights will result in civil litigation and a counterclaim for damages." 3 days later, I got an unexpected visit. A police cruiser pulled into my driveway, again. But this time the officers didn't look confused. They looked apologetic. "Sir," one of them said, "we got another call from the HOA claiming you're trespassing again. But honestly, we already know the situation. We just have to log the complaint." I sighed. "So they're still wasting police time?" The officer shrugged. "They call almost daily now. We told them to stop, but they insist it's community property." I could see frustration on his face. "Between you and me," he added quietly, "if they keep this up, they're the ones who'll be cited for filing false reports." That was satisfying to hear, but I wasn't done. They wanted to play games with fake fines and bogus claims? Fine, I'd make them play in court. That evening, I contacted an attorney, an old friend named Rachel who specialized in property law. When I explained what was happening, she chuckled darkly. "They picked the wrong guy," she said. "We'll start with a cease and desist letter. If they ignore that, we'll file for damages and harassment." The next day, her office delivered a thick envelope to the HOA headquarters. The letter outlined every violation they had committed: trespass, destruction of private property, defamation, and misuse of police resources. It warned that if they continued, we'd pursue compensation for emotional distress and property damage. It was a professional, legal punch straight to their ego. For a few days, things went quiet again. No flyers, no police. No late-night shouting. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized they were in over their heads. But peace doesn't last long when pride is on the line. That Sunday, while watering the garden, I noticed Karen and a few others gathering at the trail again. They were setting up cones and marking flags along the border, as if preparing for construction. I walked closer and asked what they were doing. Karen smirked. "We're re-establishing the walking path," she said smugly. "The HOA board voted to reclaim this area." I shook my head slowly. "You're doubling down on trespass," I warned. "And this time it's all going to court." She smiled in that arrogant, self-satisfied way that made my blood boil. "You can't fight the community," she said. "We have lawyers, funds, and the board behind us. You're just one man." I smiled back, calm but deadly certain. "You're right," I said. "I'm one man, but one with the law on his side." And as she walked away, I called Rachel. "It's time," I said simply. "File the lawsuit." That was the moment the battle officially shifted from a neighborhood feud to a legal war. One that would expose just how far an HOA could fall when their arrogance met the wrong opponent. Filing the lawsuit was like dropping a boulder into a still pond. The ripples spread through the entire community overnight. The moment Rachel filed the complaint, naming Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association and Karen Wilcox, president of the board, as defendants, the HOA's mask of civility shattered. Karen's emails, previously full of smug condescension, turned panicked. Neighbors who had once parroted her gossip started whispering about how serious things were getting. I almost felt bad for her, almost. But when someone destroys your property, calls the cops on you multiple times, and tries to rewrite legal boundaries out of spite, empathy goes out the window. The lawsuit sought $75,000 in damages for harassment, defamation, trespassing, and property destruction, plus a permanent injunction barring the HOA from ever entering my land again. It wasn't about money. It was about drawing a line they couldn't cross. The first hearing was held at the county courthouse downtown. I arrived early, dressed simply but neatly, carrying a folder filled with evidence, photos of my sign, police reports, the surveyor's statement, and my favorite, the footage of Karen and her board members prying out my private property sign. Rachel arrived moments later, confident and sharp, her presence instantly commanding respect. When the HOA's lawyer walked in, a polished man with slicked back hair named Gregory Adams, he looked like someone who had built a career intimidating homeowners into submission. But when Rachel handed him a copy of our evidence list, his smile faltered. "This is excessive," he muttered. Rachel didn't blink. "So were their lies," she said coolly. As the hearing began, the judge, an older woman named Judge Porter, glanced through the case file with visible disapproval. "I've reviewed the preliminary materials," she said, her tone firm. "This is a property boundary dispute that escalated into harassment. I expect professionalism from both parties. Let's proceed." Gregory stood first, painting the HOA as a misunderstood organization trying to protect community interests. He claimed I had invaded common land, that the boundaries were ambiguous, and that my behavior was aggressive. Rachel stood immediately after, calm but fierce. "Your Honor," she said, "the plaintiff owns this parcel outright." The deed, county survey, and police records confirm it. The HOA, led by Ms. Wilcox, ignored all evidence, trespassed multiple times, vandalized property, and filed false police reports to intimidate my client. This is not a misunderstanding. It's abuse of power. When she finished, the judge looked at me. "Mr. Cole," she said, "do you have the survey documents and footage referenced?" I nodded and handed them over. The courtroom fell silent as the video played on the projector. Karen, in her sun hat and floral blouse, yanking out my metal sign while directing two men with a smug grin. Then came the part where they installed their own residents-only sign. You could hear whispers ripple through the small crowd of spectators, mostly curious residents who had come to watch the drama unfold. Karen's face turned bright red. The judge paused the video and raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Wilcox," she said dryly, "would you care to explain this?" Karen stammered, "Your Honor, we believe that area was community property. We were simply restoring it to its intended purpose." Judge Porter's expression hardened. "By removing someone else's property and replacing it with your own signage? Without any proof of ownership?" Karen tried to speak again, but her words collapsed into mumbling. Rachel seized the moment. "Your Honor, may I also note that this was done after my client presented proof of ownership to the HOA and law enforcement? This wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate." The judge leaned back in her chair. "I see. Well, that video alone casts significant doubt on the HOA's position." Over the next hour, the courtroom turned into a battlefield of paper and logic. Rachel dismantled the HOA's argument piece by piece. She presented the property deed from the county recorder's office, stamped and notarized, predating the HOA's own founding charter by nearly 2 decades. She showed correspondence where Karen dismissed my documentation as fake. Then she presented the police reports showing repeated false calls, 3 in total, each time accusing me of trespassing on my own land. The final blow came when the county surveyor Dennis testified. He explained the precise GPS coordinates and how the HOA's claimed walking path lay entirely within my property. "There is no ambiguity," he said clearly. The line is recorded in county data. The land belongs to Mr. Cole. By the time Rachel finished, Gregory's confidence had evaporated. He tried to counter by suggesting historical community use implied some form of easement, meaning the HOA should have ongoing access. But Rachel was ready. There was no easement ever recorded, she said. Use without permission is trespass, not a right. Judge Porter nodded, clearly impressed. Gregory sputtered, "Well, perhaps this could be resolved with mutual concessions?" The judge's expression sharpened. Mr. Adams, from what I've seen, one party followed the law and the other repeatedly ignored it. This is not a situation for mutual anything. When court adjourned that day, Karen stormed out, muttering that she'd never lose to a bully. But in truth, her arrogance had already cost her. Local reporters had attended the hearing, small-town papers loved HOA drama, and by evening, an article appeared online titled, "Homeowner Sues HOA Over False Trespass Claims, Video Evidence Shocks Court." The headline spread through the community like wildfire. Neighbors who once glared at me now waved awkwardly or avoided eye contact altogether. I didn't rub it in, but I wasn't above enjoying poetic justice. Over the next few weeks, depositions began. Every email, memo, and board meeting record was subpoenaed, and that's when things really unraveled. One of the board members, under oath, admitted that Karen had known about the county survey. Months earlier, she just didn't care. Another revealed that Karen had personally instructed members to keep calling the police until he gives up. The court transcripts were a goldmine of incrimination. Rachel and I reviewed them late one evening in her office. "This is beyond negligence," she said. "It's harassment with intent. We can ask for punitive damages," I smiled. "Then let's ask." The HOA's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement before the next hearing. "We're willing to issue an apology," he said cautiously, "and reimburse for minor damages if your client drops the case." Rachel laughed softly. "You vandalized his property, defamed him, and abused emergency services. Minor damages won't cut it." Gregory sighed. "You'll ruin them," he said quietly. Rachel replied, "They did that themselves." The second hearing, held 3 weeks later, sealed the deal. The judge ruled in my favor on every count: trespassing, defamation, and malicious conduct. The HOA was ordered to pay $82,000 in damages, remove all signage from my property, and issue a formal written apology to be distributed to all residents. But the most satisfying part was the injunction. The HOA was legally barred from stepping foot on my land ever again. When Judge Porter read the ruling aloud, I glanced at Karen. She sat rigid, jaw clenched, refusing to look up. Her empire of control had crumbled in a single afternoon. After the hearing, several residents approached me in the parking lot. One older man who had served on the HOA years ago shook my hand. "You did what none of us ever could," he said. "She's been running this place like a dictatorship for years." Another woman admitted she had believed the HOA's lies at first. "I'm sorry for how people treated you," she said. "We were wrong." I told her it was all water under the bridge. For the first time in months, I felt free, not just legally but emotionally. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. Because while the court had spoken, Karen wasn't finished with her vengeance just yet. That night, as I stood on my porch watching the sunset, I spotted movement near the edge of my property, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. For a second, I thought it was an animal, but then the light caught a familiar silhouette. Karen. She stood there, arms crossed, staring silently at my sign, the same one she had once torn down. Then without a word, she turned and disappeared into the shadows. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a chill, because something told me this wasn't the last I'd see of her. After the verdict, life in Maplewood Estates seemed to settle into an uneasy calm. The HOA's board quietly dissolved half its committees, and their once bustling Facebook group went silent. No more flyers. No more community patrols. For the first time in months, I could walk across my property without feeling like I was being watched. The neighbors who had once believed Karen's propaganda now smiled politely or waved from a distance. Some even apologized outright. The HOA had been humiliated publicly. The local paper ran a follow-up story titled, "Homeowner Triumphs Over HOA Harassment. Court Upholds Private Property Rights." For most people, That would have been the end of the story. But for Karen Wilcox, humiliation wasn't something she could swallow. It was poison in her veins, and I could see it eating away at her pride every time our paths crossed. Even after the court order, she still found reasons to linger near the property line, pretending to inspect the trail that no longer existed. Her fake smile couldn't hide the bitterness that simmered beneath it. One crisp autumn morning, I stepped outside to find tire tracks again, deep ones cutting through the damp soil near my fence. My heart sank. I followed them to the back of the lot where I discovered a pile of trash bags, broken branches, and what looked like old furniture dumped right across my land. Someone had clearly driven in overnight and left it there deliberately. I checked the footage from my security cameras, and there it was, a silver SUV, headlights off, pulling in around midnight. The driver's face was blurry, but I could see enough to recognize that familiar posture, stiff shoulders, cropped blonde hair, moving with the same determined arrogance. It was Karen. She was back, and this time she wasn't just trespassing. She was trying to provoke me into losing my temper. Instead of calling the police immediately, I decided to set a trap. I installed an extra set of motion-activated cameras along the tree line and replaced my private property sign with a new one that read, "Smile, you're on camera," again. Then I waited. 3 nights later, she came back. I watched the footage live from my phone, disbelief turning into grim amusement as Karen crept across the property with a flashlight, dragging a garbage bag behind her. She dumped it right beneath the sign, looked up, and froze when the motion light flared to life. For a few seconds, she just stood there, staring straight into the lens, and then bolted back to her car. That was all I needed. I called the sheriff's office the next morning, handed over the footage, and within 2 days, a deputy showed up at her door with a summons. When the news broke that the former HOA president was being investigated for criminal trespass and illegal dumping, the community erupted. People who had once supported her now wanted nothing to do with her. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her from her position pending investigation, though it was more of a symbolic gesture since her reputation was already in ruins. Still, Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. She called me one evening, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You ruined my name, my life, everything I built." I stayed silent, letting her words hang. "All I ever did was protect this neighborhood," she continued, her tone cracking. "You'll regret this. You'll see." I hung up before she could finish. I'd dealt with too many people like her before. The kind who could never admit they were wrong because their identity depended on being in control. A few weeks later, the county filed formal charges. Karen had no defense. The footage was undeniable. The prosecutor offered a plea deal, community service, probation, and a fine. She accepted, probably to avoid jail time, but the damage was done. The court ordered her to pay restitution for cleanup costs and to stay at least 100 feet away from my property. It was poetic justice. The woman who once fined neighbors for leaving trash cans out too long was now legally required to pick up garbage by the roadside. The day I saw her in an orange vest, collecting litter under the supervision of a county worker, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't smile or gloat. I just nodded, turned away, and let her drown in her own humiliation. With Karen gone, the HOA tried to rebuild. The new president, a quiet engineer named Mark Reynolds, reached out to me personally. "We'd like to make things right," he said. "Would you consider helping us fix the boundaries properly?" I agreed on one condition. They had to install permanent markers along the property line and update their maps to reflect the true legal boundaries. He agreed immediately. Within a month, the county surveyor returned, and new stakes were installed, this time with both HOA and county representatives present. No one argued. No one raised their voice. For the first time, logic and law prevailed over pride and gossip. That winter, I finally felt peace. I built a small wooden fence along the boundary, not because I needed to, but because I wanted a visible reminder of what I'd fought for. It wasn't just land anymore. It was a symbol of standing your ground against arrogance and entitlement. Neighbors started stopping by to chat, offering pies, coffee, and apologies for believing Karen's lies. I wasn't bitter. In a way, the whole ordeal had brought the community closer together, united by the realization that blind authority, even under the guise of community rules, can easily become tyranny. Months passed and life returned to normal. The grass grew tall, birds returned to the trees, and the laughter of children replaced the tension that once hung in the air. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the fence, I noticed something glinting near the trail. A small silver HOA badge lying in the dirt. I picked it up, turned it over, and read the faded engraving. Karen Wilcox, President. I chuckled softly, tossed it into the trash, and went back to work. That badge, once her symbol of power, was now just another forgotten piece of metal rusting in the ground she once tried to control. But fate had one last twist in store. A few months later, I received a letter, not from the HOA, but from the county. It was a notice that the old walking trail behind my property had been officially decommissioned and would be merged into the county's wildlife restoration program. The land that Karen once fought to control would now be protected forever, with my lot serving as its northern border. It was as if the earth itself had decided to erase every trace of her dominance. I signed the approval papers with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that peace wasn't just restored, it was permanent. The following spring, I hosted a small barbecue for a few neighbors, the good ones who had stood by me during the madness. As the sun set over the trees, one of them raised a glass. "To freedom from HOA tyranny," he said with a grin. Everyone laughed, and I couldn't help but join in. The air was warm, the fire crackled, and for the first time since I'd moved there, the property truly felt like home. Before heading in that night, I walked to the edge of my land where the private property sign still stood, now weathered but firm. I brushed some dust off the metal and looked toward the road where Karen used to patrol like a self-appointed sheriff. It was empty now, silent except for the wind and the distant sound of crickets. I smiled, not out of pride, but peace. The battle was over. I had won not through anger or revenge, but by standing firm in the truth. Because sometimes, the loudest way to win isn't by shouting, it's by letting justice speak for itself. And as the night settled in, that old sign gleamed under the moonlight, a quiet reminder of the lesson every HOA bully should learn. Never mistake authority for ownership, and never ever underestimate the man who knows his rights.